how to read the sitemap produced by Tenable.io's web application scanner. The format of this sitemap is a CSV file, which we will dig into later. This is extremely useful in both ensuring that you have completely or fully audited a web application, as well as troubleshooting and looking for areas to optimize the scan. Now, I've already clicked into one scan to show as an example. Now go ahead and type in sitemap, and then locate the web application sitemap plugin. This plugin will appear every time the scan has completed successfully, so you are pretty much guaranteed to have this. Go ahead and click into the instances, and then there should be one lone instance here. Before we dig into that CSV, let's go ahead and walk through what we provide in the user interface for you guys. Number one, at the very top here, the scan has discovered 30 distinct URLs. Let's go through a breakdown of those 30 URLs. Of that 30, 7 were audited effectively. What happened to the other 23? Well, 18 of those were not audited due to the scan time limit being reached. 2 of them were not audited due to file extension exclusions. 2 of them were not audited due to the URL not being in the target domain. And then the last one here was not queued due to the path pattern exclusions. Now, let's go ahead and go through each 4 of these real quick. The very top one here, the scan time limit being reached. This is something which is configurable in the scan policy. So if you see this, then one of your first moves may be to expand the scan timeout within your scan policy. For the file extensions, there is a default list of file extensions which we do not scan. However, just like the above, this is something which is configurable in the scan policy. For the URLs which are not in the target domain, this is actually not going to be configurable outside of changing the actual target itself. And this is because we do not want to go off and scan something which you do not own. For example, let's say that you were to provide a link to youtube.com on your application. We do not want to go off and scan youtube.com, and I'm sure you don't want us to do that either. Therefore, we will simply note in the sitemap that you have a link to that site without actually going off and scanning it. For the path pattern exclusion, there is a default of logout, all lowercase, in this particular box. However, just like some of the above items, this is something which can be configured as well. All right, let's go ahead and open up the attachments. Click into the attachments, go to the sitemap CSV, and click on download. You can open this up with Microsoft Excel or any other application which can open up a CSV file. I'm going to go ahead and drag this onto the screen now. And let's walk through each of these columns line by line. I'm going to expand the columns so that you can see them more easily. The first column here, column A, provides the URL. Then the next column over tells us what time we discovered that URL first. The column to the right of that is found on. That can also be considered to be the referrer. In this particular case, many of these URLs were found from the initial website, but if you look at column D, you'll get a little bit more information as to how we found a particular URL. At the very top, you're always going to have the target URI as the very first URL on the site. Then the following ones could be found through the authentication method provided, crawling, through discovery of a robot.txt file, or even through the browser itself. Going to the right, let's continue. Column E was this URL actually requested? Column F, if it was requested, so if column E is true, what was the status code? If column E was false, there's going to be no status code as well as no response time. The response time is important because it can tell you which sections of an application may be laggy or taking longer to respond than other sections. Moving on, column H is content length, if applicable. Column I, again if applicable, is content type. And then column J, I would say that the remaining columns here are very important to understand. Column J is, was this URL queued to be audited? If true, then was it actually audited is column L. If column J is false, column K will provide a reason as to why that URL was not queued. However, there are plenty of opportunities where column J is true, but column L, if it actually was audited, is false. In this particular case, we can see that the only option was because the scan time limit was reached. Again, it's important to note that this particular setting can be configured in the scan policy. As well, please note that application scanning is a very timely activity. These scans can sometimes take many hours to complete. Now, as for reasons why things were not queued, again, just like we went over before, we see that the reasons given are excluded file extension, excluded path patterns, and not in domain.